First on the news at 6 o'clock, Judge Don Johnson will remain behind the sentencing of former Baton Rouge police officer Donald Steele.
That is after his niece, Eboni Rose Johnson, botched Steele's previous sentencing on malfeasance and kidnapping. Prosecutors wanted Judge Johnson to recuse himself. News 2's David Hamilton in court today with the decision made.
Sylvia, Michael, the decision was up to Judge Carson Marcantel. He explained that the state just did not have any evidence to prove that Judge Don Johnson would rule unfairly because of his relationship to Judge Eboni Johnson Rose. District Attorney Hiller Moore said earlier this month that he did not want Judge Donald Johnson handling the sentence for ex-Baton Rouge police officer Donald Steele. His office argued in court that they do not believe Judge Don Johnson can be impartial since he is Rose's uncle. However, 19 JDC Judge Carson Marcantel ruled that their family ties weren't enough to keep Judge Don Johnson off of Steele's sentencing.
Was that these cases that are being taken over are being handled by a family member, and that results in bias. And so our position is that we would expect that if that's the state's concern, that they would be filing that motion in every single one of those cases, and he's now taken over the entire docket. So
Don Johnson was handed the case after he took over Eboni Rose's criminal docket and she took his civil docket. For this matter, Steele was a former Baton Rouge police officer accused of groping a woman back in 2021 during a traffic stop. Eboni Rose convicted Steele on misdemeanor malfeasance, a crime that doesn't exist. A month later, she acquitted him. Since then, the First Circuit and Supreme Court have affirmed Steele's conviction and said Rose overstepped her bounds in this case. Her handling of the case is also a part of what led to her suspension from the bench last year for several months. The state argued that both sides originally wanted to recuse Don Johnson off the case, but Steele's attorneys changed their mind.
We met with Judge Don Johnson, and both parties expressed, is this a concern, your familial relationship? He said, I'm going to go do some legal research. I'm going to look at the canons of judicial conduct. He came back to us several days later and said, look, I've done the research, I've reviewed the law, and I think that I can be fair and impartial. And that's good enough for us. That's good enough for Mr. Steele.
In court, Judge Marcantel stated that the state presented no facts besides the pair's relationship and no evidence for him to believe Don Johnson would rule improper in this case.
Yes, he's related, but there's been no evidence that he can't be anything but fair and impartial, and our experience with him is that he is fair and impartial, so we're just moving forward.
Sentencing for Donald Steele is on September 8th. Michael.